Hey humans, how's it going? Susan Ruth here. Thanks for listening to another episode of Hey Human Podcast. This is episode 402 and my guest is Vanessa McGrady. Vanessa is an award-winning journalist. She's the author of a memoir, Rock Needs River, which details her struggles conceiving and ultimately becoming an adoptive parent. And I read the book. It's a really great book. It is a roller coaster ride. The story of her life is a fascinating one, and the journey that she took to become a mom is a fascinating one. It involves the birth parents. It involves an ex-husband who passes away. There's just so much. It's a really incredible story, and it's my understanding it's being made into a television show as well. It's up for that, so it's very exciting. She's also a ceramicist on top of all that other stuff, and she just opened a new Etsy shop called Art and Intrigue, so that's exciting. All right, check out heyhumanpodcast.com for links and to learn more about my guests in the show. Check out susanruth.com to learn more about me and my other artistic endeavors. Follow Susan Ruthism and Hey Human Podcast on social media. Find my albums on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, wherever you get your music. Rate, review, and subscribe to Hey Human Podcast on iTunes or iHeart or, gosh, pretty much anywhere you get podcasts these days, you will find it. All right. Thank you for listening. Be well, be kind, be love, and here we go. Vanessa McGrady, welcome to Hey Human.
Thanks. It's amazing to be here.
You and I met at a mutual friend's birthday party. We were sitting next to each other and struck up a conversation, which I absolutely love doing, by the way. I don't know about you, but anytime I'm sitting at a bar situation, talking to strangers, the best. And I thought, you're so interesting. Your story as it unfolded, as you were telling me about yourself, I thought, this is the perfect person to come on the show. So I appreciate you trusting me with your story.
Well, you trusted me. We went to the theater that night because I had an extra ticket. So you didn't know if who I was, but you just came right along. So I guess
that's true.
Mutual admiration and trust.
Tell me about your upbringing. Where did you grow up? What was family like?
So I am originally from New York, and my parents divorced when I was very young. And so I grew up in New York primarily. And then at 12, my dad moved us to the Pacific Northwest, and that's where his family was. And then we would see my mom intermittently and sometimes have vacations with her. And then when I was a junior in high school, I just couldn't live at home anymore. My dad, I'll preface this by saying I love my dad. He was bigger than life. He was the most generous, funny, smart person, but also I don't think he really knew how to raise a girl. And so by the time I was in high school, I was just too confined and ready to leave. And I was also way out in the country, and I just felt I needed the city again. So I went back to New York and I became a roommate with my mom, which sounds weird to say, but she was not really a traditional kind of mom. She was an artist and very airy and up there in the clouds. And then I stayed there and went to college and then kind of bopped around a little bit after that.
Did you know who you were yet at that point?
I feel like a lot of times we all, growing up, we always think we know who we are, and we're consistently evolving. So I think at any given moment in your whole trajectory, you can know who you are, but that might not be the same in 5 minutes.
You wrote a book, Rock Needs River, and you express who you are very much through that story. But I think just knowing you for the short amount of time I've known you, it feels very much like you have a strong sense of self, grounded sense of self. And reading the book, I feel like that was hard-earned in some aspects, but also in other aspects, it seemed like you kind of started from the get-go with a tenacity.
Yeah, that's actually a really lovely insight. Thank you for that. Well, now I'm 56 and I feel probably like the best I've ever felt in my life. And I've felt the best about my choices. I will say sometimes I feel like my life is kind of like the trajectory of Breaking Bad, where they make one bad choice and then it leads to another bad choice, and then I mean I've never like tried to hide a dead body, but in the way just like the chain reaction of choices are not so great. I have not always been proud of those choices, but I feel like they did lead me to now where I am super happy. I have a beautiful, talented, lovely daughter and a sweetheart Menchie husband, and we're just trying to live the life we want.
Let's get into young adulthood for you. Take us through what that was like.
Well, right now it's kind of a blur. I again, not great choices. I came out of college, and I had this wonderful boyfriend, and we moved. He got a job in New Mexico, so I followed him to Gallup, New Mexico, which is a very small town, and we stayed there and we worked at the newspaper there. And it was really quite a learning experience. And I was in my early 20s. We were in the middle of 7 Native American reservations, so we learned a lot about Indian culture, and we made so many friends. Then it was it was small, and for our careers, we both had to move on, and I was ready to get back to the Northwest. So we did that, and then we split up like people in their 20s do. And I will say my 20s were kind of a blur. Way too much drinking, for sure. Way too much. And of course, bad choices. But I lived in a cabin off the grid. I had to find a place to live, and I asked my friend who lived on the same road. I said, "Do you have anything, a room that I can rent for you, or a shack that I get?" This is in Port Townsend, Washington. So, it's like lots of hippies, and that's normal to, live in somebody's bus or whatever. And she said, "No, but there's a place for sale. It's 5 acres for sale up the road from me." And so I just put a down payment on a credit card. It was a $25,000 piece of land. I was working as a waitress, so I think my mortgage was $200 a month.
Those were the days.
Yeah, I mean, of course I did. It was completely off the grid. There was no hot water except for what I would heat up on my stove. I had solar panels. It was really drafty and cold, and but it was mine. So that was my most of my 20s.
How did you take care of the especially as a woman who menstruates every month? How did you deal with all the general things of living, the bodily functions?
Bathe, I had a water runoff system. So in the summertime, I just took there's these shower bags, and you fill the shower up with warm water and you hang them on the side of the house and you take your shower. My mom lived in town, so when I needed a really good, head to toe scrubbing, I would go see her. But I really I had a stove, and I had water and light and fireplace and a propane heater. So it was just, I will say that I do appreciate every single hot shower I've ever taken since then. And also, I am glad I don't have to pee in a tomato can anymore. But I will always be able to do that. So now I know that if I ever had to do it again, I could, but I would do it better. I know that there was one time where, as I was single with my dog, one time I was replacing the chimney, and I was on the roof and I was putting the chimney through the hole, and I was just wishing there was somebody below to catch it and to help adjust it. And that I remember that moment so clearly, thinking, wow, this would just be easier with someone who was as invested in this as I was. So I knew I could do it again, but I'd just do it better this time.
Do you still have that land?
I don't. I sold it. I was winter waitressing in a Northwest tourist town, and sometimes I'd have like $7 tips at night. So I ended up having to take a job in Seattle where I worked for a magazine and, had a regular apartment and a salary. And
You always had a writing inclination. Was that in the back of your mind to pursue, or did it just come that you fell into things?
well, I came at it from a couple angles. First, I come from a writer family. My dad and my uncle Mike and my grandfather as well, were all writers, and they were pretty prolific. And my dad, fun fact, my dad, Pat McGrady, and his brother Mike McGrady were the first two brothers in history to be on the New York Times bestseller list. So I know you can't see this if you're listening, but I'll show you this picture. That's a picture of them from People magazine so what the picture is for anyone who doesn't see it, and maybe if you want to post a copy of it, you can. But it's two middle-aged men with Smith Corona typewriters in front of them, and they're each tapping on each other's typewriter. So, and it's black and white. So yes, I come from a family of writers, but also I don't feel like I was like really good at anything else, and I couldn't think of what else I would do. Most of my career, besides service work, I've been a writer of one kind or another.
What was your dad in? What were their book? Was it a book they wrote together, or was it a book they wrote separately?
My dad wrote a book called The Pritikin Diet, or Pritikin Program for Diet and Exercise, with a guy named Nathan Pritikin. And my uncle Mike co-wrote the Linda Lovelace autobiography.
Whoa!
That was called Ordeal. So those, two very different books, but they both were on the bestseller list at the same time.
Was your dad a big health nut?
Well, this is funny. I was just thinking about this morning. He was, most of the time as he got older, he was not super healthy. I mean, he always had extra weight and sort of wasn't exercising because he had bad knees, and he would stash Oreos and ice cream for a company. I'm making air quotes here, for company. But we were very we had to be on the Pritikin diet when we were kids. And I was just thinking, wow, I feel like I was thinking this morning as I was feeding my daughter, that I feel like we spent a lot of time really hungry for food that was not, I mean, we never, were purposely starved, but it was a low fat, low protein diet back then. And I don't think they knew enough. And I feel like we just were so hungry all the time. I mean, I guess he was a health nut in that way for other people, but not necessarily for himself.
That's always the way, isn't it? What happens now after college, after the land? What happens next?
So I had moved to Seattle, I guess it was the year 2000, and I was working. I came to visit in California to visit friends, and I was just so struck by how beautiful it was and how vibrant. I was actually in your part of town. I was in Santa Monica. And the beach was so gorgeous, and everybody seems just like anything could happen here. Like if you wanted to build a rocket ship, you could find people who also want to build a rocket ship, and by gum, you're going to get that rocket ship up in the air. So then I went back to Seattle where I was living, and I was being a playwright and a producer. And I had kind of failed. I wasn't a great playwright at that time because I was so concerned about what the product was going to be. I sort of lost sight of the actual art of it. So I had finished a second round of a show that was really successful the first time. The second time, my theater was too big and the run was too long and it wasn't that good. And then in the meantime, the boyfriend that I was living with started cheating on me. And then he moved right next door. So I could see him all the time. And I just felt, I feel like it's time to go. I feel like it's just time to move. So and then my dad had died 2 years before that. And I just felt like I think it's time to leave. So I thought either I'll go back to New York or come to California. And I just thought, well, I'll try California. And that was in 2005. And here we are 19 years later. And I guess I'm still here. It's still my home. So
And it's sunny all the time, unlike New York.
It's true.
Although I love New York.
And I don't build your rocket ship with you in New York either.
All along, you were starting to feel the call of momhood, and that became a battle cry almost.
Yes. In my late 20s, I started thinking, maybe I'll have a baby in 2 years. In 2 years. And it was always 2 years. And then I got pregnant, and I was surprisingly so excited to have this baby. I was just over the moon, and I was working at a magazine, and on my office wall I had a list where people could write names, suggest names, and people started giving me little things because I was so excited. My cousin's wife gave me this beautiful blanket, and then at 12 weeks I miscarried, and it was really devastating for anybody who, I guess it's understandable whether you've miscarried or not, but it was just, and then I realized, like, oh, I actually really do want to become a mother. But I also had never really found the right partner. I have a very close friend. We had dated on and off from the Port Townsend days, and he's, a lovely guy, and he came to stay with me in California for a little while, and we actually tried to have a baby. We had two more early miscarriages after that. And then I started thinking, like, wow, maybe this baby is not going to come out of my hoo-ha. Like, I feel like this baby has to happen a different way, probably. And then cut to 2008, when I met my daughter's father, and we worked together, and we got married. But he also had a vasectomy. His kids were mostly grown, but he was on board. And so I had already started the adoption process, and I, had done all my paperwork and background checks, and he got on the train and did that as well. And then exactly 9 months after we got married, I held my daughter for the first time.
Let's dig in a little to the story around that. You wrote an entire book about this whole journey, and I highly recommend it. It's a great book. Really, what struck me is that every time you would step forward 1 foot, you had to step backward 2 feet. But you kept stepping forward, which a lot of people, I think, would give up in feeling overwhelmed by it all. But you just kept moving forward.
But do you think that's true with almost anybody who wants something? Like, if you're an actor?
No, I don't. I don't think that. That's why I find it, when I see it in people, I like to remark on it. It is remarkable, because I think there are a lot of things that we do and don't do for ourselves that really lead to a lot of self-sabotage, or feelings that we're not worth a life that we think we want or deserve, and that we might work toward it, but still do things to ebb away at that goal. Even if, a lot of times it's unconscious. I think that people just have this self-sabotage default. It's funny, you could read some of your history as being sabotage-esque, but it never really felt like that. It felt more the opposite. It felt more like, I'm going to do this thing and see what happens next. It felt more like leaps of faith, if you will, than I'm going to do a thing that is probably not going to work out. It was almost like an optimistic view of a pessimistic world or something. I'm not sure how to phrase it exactly.
I, in my pottery studio, said something the other day about his work, and he said, it's ready, fire, aim. And I think that's a good way to describe what you're saying. Yes.
Yeah. Does that feel like an accurate description of you?
It does, but I don't think, I'm just not the person who planned out their life. And so many people do. When I wanted things and I'm good at manifesting, I'd say, like, there was no way I was not going to have a baby. Like I just knew somehow, but it was also a knowing that I'd had for a long time that I would be, and I was for many years, a single mother. And I don't know how I knew that, but I just always knew that.
Well, you got signs along the way as well. There were what some might consider woo woo, but the universe seemed to keep winking at you.
Love how you put that. Yes. So I would say the first sign was I went to Israel to visit my brother who was raised there. His mother was from my dad's first marriage. And we were standing at this beautiful church. It's a beautiful Russian Orthodox church on the top of a hill in Jerusalem. And I just went by myself and I started walking around, and I was standing in the graveyard where they buried, the nuns and everything. And suddenly I just heard this voice, and there was nobody around me. I cannot tell you if it was male or female or where it came from, but the words were, "It's okay to ask for a miracle." And I heard this and I looked around and there was nobody there. And so I just felt like, okay, well, I guess this is, good a place as any to ask for a miracle. Top of a hill in a holy city. So probably can't get much closer. So I just said I would like to find someone who wants to have a child with me, and I'd like to be a mom. And then I came back from that trip and I met my husband at work like the next week. So, I met the man who would become my husband.
Yeah. I've heard that voice before myself, and it also had to do with the concept of miracles. I'll have to tell you that story sometime.
Oh, I'm so happy to detour if you want to now, but yeah.
It's kind of a long story, but the gist of it, not only am I a miracle, not only are you a miracle, but everything is a miracle. Our existence.
It's a miracle. And I was thinking about this. I was in Ireland last summer, and our family's Irish. And I started learning a little bit more about all of the evictions and the unfairness and the persecution that Irish people had under the English rule. And I wrote to my cousins and I was saying, do you know how amazing it is that we are here? We've survived all of that. And you think about really everybody. You think about everybody in this country who survived coming from somewhere else, or, if they're indigenous, survived, white people colonization. If they came from Africa, if their ancestors were slaves, they survived that.
Or women who have survived sexual violence throughout history.
It's even a miracle that that sperm chose that egg.
Every little thing that had to happen for us to even be sitting here right now.
Yep. Just sitting in a miracle all the time, even though we forget, it's so easy to forget, of course. And how lucky are we now that we can sit here and talk about miracles and not have to worry like, oh, where am I going to sleep tonight?
Exactly.
I think that's,
yeah.
We have a certain privilege to be able to do that.
For sure. Or the fact that we can talk about anything we want to and no stormtrooper will come through the door to haul us away, which is happening today in lots of places.
Not yet, anyway.
Yeah, not yet, anyway. Well, let's get back to you. You come home and you meet the man and he agrees, even though it's my understanding that he was a little on the fence about it, but he loved you.
Yeah, he loved me. We loved each other. He had a very messy divorce that was impending when we met. And then, of course, he kind of moved it along once we met. And then we were married, became parents, and then his alcoholism took over. And I really love addicts so much. Like, they're so fun. They're so generous. They're so gregarious. And it's so wild and amazing and free and fun until it's not.
Hmm.
if you've ever known.
Oh, yes. I preferred them in my younger days as well.
So, um, so we had to split up because I was I was, just kind of turned off.
You sounded like you were in denial of it for quite a long time.
Well, I mean, I was complicit in it for some of the time. There was like for the year before, I didn't drink so that we could have at least one sober person in the household. I didn't drink at all. And, I always liked my glass of wine or, a cocktail or whatever, but I felt like I couldn't even do that because we had a little baby. And then there was another time where we were going to a Christmas party and he veered across a 4-lane highway with a baby in the back. And I felt like, oh my God, this is not safe for us. I didn't realize he'd been drinking before we got in the car. So we turned around and went home. And that was really the beginning of the end. And very, very sadly, he died in 2019 of alcoholism and liver failure. So we miss him every day, and I wish it had turned out different.
Yeah. How old was your daughter when he passed?
She was 7 and she's almost 13 now. She is very protective of the memory of her dad. She does not talk about him a lot, but I know she holds him close, close in her vest. And she has, she has her pictures up and we talked the other day and I said, I've never seen you cry about daddy. Have you, is that something that you feel like you can do or you don't want to do? And she said she has, but I think grief in children is a lot different and less straightforward than it is in adults.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it can manifest in a lot of different ways, of course, for anyone. What's interesting also about your story is that you were not closed off to the idea of knowing about her birth parents or her knowing about her birth parents, and that took you on an incredibly interesting journey, in my humble opinion. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So her parents her birth parents are named Bridget and Bill. We met them 4 days before Grace was born. They had already kind of gone through another prospective family and a single woman, I think, didn't work out. And then our social worker called us. We had done all this work and I had been waiting basically, in the mix for 2 years. So just to back up the history of adoption, I'm not going to give you a novel or a book or a treatise on it, but people should know that up until about the 80s, most adoptions were a closed file. So, or they were like with kin, and children would not know who their birth parents were, and unless they actively did a kind of a search or a records request or something. Most of the time, there was really not any contact between the birth parent, and the birth parents were not able to pick usually who would become caregivers for their children that they had. And so it was just, you're next in line, here you go. Did you want a boy? Did you want a girl? Here's your child. So that changed quite a bit starting in the 80s with open adoptions, and that allowed all three pieces of the puzzle, the birth parents, the adoptive parents, and the children, to know each other and to be equally important. How the birth parent wanted to place their child, who they wanted to place them with, what terms they wanted. So some birth parents want no contact, some want, in the occasional photo, and then some want to be ingrained in the lives. It's not legally binding what you ask for initially, and then often it changes. So sometimes people are pretty sure they want that, but also, their circumstances change, and they don't, or vice versa. So we had met Bridget and Bill. We thought we were a good match, and we were. They were musicians. The pregnancy was a surprise. Bridget said she did not know for 6 months that she was pregnant until one day she looked down and there was like a basketball in her middle. And so they were not really in the position to parent at that time. They were very close to being homeless. Bill worked at a fast food restaurant. Bridget could not find a job. She had just come from Ohio the year before and had been working in grocery, but she just could not land a job here. And they just were not in a good position. I want to footnote this by saying that one thing I hate the most about the United States is that we don't care about mothers and children as much as we say we do. I would never, ever, ever want a decision to be financial or because, for someone to place a child for adoption. I actually think that's inhumane. And it's inhumane that, that so many people do have to make that choice because we don't take care of our people. But
I agree.
Yeah. So, but they also were not, emotionally ready to do that either. And so then on the day she was born, it's funny. I had to go. I was at work. I was working at this big corporation, and I had to go to this business trip. And I asked if I couldn't go because my baby was going to be born soon. And my boss was like, "Well, why don't you just go? She's a first-time mom. It'll take a while. You can come back." And then I'm at this hotel for like 12 hours or something. And I get this text from Bill, "Bridget's in labor, send Steve," my husband. I'm like, wait a second. And so I have to come from Northern California and I'm like running for the plane and I'm saying, "My baby's going to be born. My baby's being born." And people are like, "Ma'am, excuse me." Classic running through the airport. And then my friend who was going to pick me up and take me to the hospital was late. And he's just like, "On my way, I'm like, oh my God, it's just Burbank. You live like 10 minutes away, really?" But finally, we made it. And Grace was, Steve was already in the hospital room and Bridget, and he's called Peter in the book, but his name's really Steve. Bridget and Bill were there. And there was this like tiny little fussy baby in her clear plastic bin. And I picked her up and she stopped crying. And then she, I became her mom.
At first, you didn't really know how involved you were going to be with the birth parents.
I definitely didn't know that they would live with us for a while. So they became homeless when Grace was about 2. Steve, by that time, had moved out because of the drinking. So I was single momming it with just me and Grace in my little apartment in Glendale. They let me know that they had become homeless and they were sleeping on the street. And I want to say it was like Thanksgiving. It was around Thanksgiving. And I had invited them over for like a little pre-Thanksgiving where they could, see Grace and, we could all be together and kind of be like this family. I mean, it was the kind of family. And then it was this year, it was 2010, it was 2011. And it was one of those winters where it just did not stop raining. Those, LA rain, I think, is different than a lot of other places rain. Like when it decides to rain, it goes for it. There's no stopping it. They were living in a tent on the street at that time. So I just thought, well, that's not acceptable. I think almost anybody would say that's not acceptable if they knew somebody who was knew and loved somebody who was like living in a tent. So I said, "Well, why don't you come stay with me?" I guess the mistake there was really not putting boundaries or expectations around that or how long they could stay or, what my terms were for them staying. So they were in and out for a while. Sometimes they would want to go back to the street or to the shelter because they were closer to their services, I guess. But then every now and then they would like show up on my doorstep. And then there was one day where I just like, I had tried to, and this is how naive I was. I thought, oh, if I just talk, if I bring in my friend who works at Trader Joe's, who can tell them how to get a job at Trader Joe's, they'll go get jobs. When not realizing like it's systems, like they needed entire systems to help them. They needed housing systems, medical, mental health, just so many other systems that I was just not able to even understand until much later. They decided, and I think there became some friction too, because like I don't know what they did all day. So I was, out working at this like toxic job where I had to wear Mrs. Separates and, drive to work and drive back. And my baby was in, Grace was in daycare. And I was like, oh my God, what did you guys do all day? And like, I guess they just played music all day in my house. And so I became a little bit like, all right, well, let's get a plan going here. And that just never really happened. And so when they left. But in the meantime, I was doing a lot of personal essay and I wrote a story for the New York Times. At that time, the column was called Motherload and it was a parenting column. And I wrote about us and they asked me to write about it as well. They were completely on board because they felt like, well, if people know our story, maybe they would want to help us. And they actually did I put a post in my mom's group, or I guess it was on Facebook, and tons of people they sent them gift cards, they sent them clothes, one guy from Michigan sent them a bunny cage for their rabbit, like an actual bunny cage in the mail. Like people just came out of the woodwork to help them, which was truly lovely and inspiring. The human heart just has no bounds. But, after a while, like that was just really not a sustainable situation. And the thing that clinched it for me was Grace, I think, was starting to become very anxious. So she was crying, she was clinging to me. She wouldn't go to sleep without me, sleeping, like right on me. And I was like, okay, I think this coming and going is not good for her. I think it's good for her to know them and to love them, but the coming and going is not working. So I didn't invite them back. And then we saw each other several times after that. But I think when the book came out, they, I don't know, I just felt like they maybe thought they were too exposed or something. I don't know. I don't really know.
How long has it been since you've heard from them?
Since 2019. And I have a contract with them that I would give a portion of anything I make from the book to them from the book sales. When I got my advance, I cut a check, and then the second time I cut a check, and I still have those checks in my file because they didn't want them and they, refused to take it. So
it's interesting.
Yeah. So someday, if they ever want it, there's money for them. But I, and hopefully if Grace ever wants to know them, they will be accessible to her.
Yeah. Let's talk about the book a bit.
I'd never written a book before, or I guess I'd had like pieces of books, and I never really felt like I had enough to say for one book, enough about one thing to say for a book. And then, so the New York Times article ran, it got a lot of attention. There was an enterprise at that time called She Books, which was shorter ebooks kind of geared toward women. And these were like smaller books, like 20,000 words maybe. And so I contacted somebody there because I thought, oh, well, maybe I'll just expand this article. And she first accepted it and said, actually, this should be a real book. Call this agent, see if, she's interested. And then I called the agent, and the agent said, not for me, but it is for Cheryl Pientka, I think, who was an agent in New York. She had done her thesis on open adoption because she's adopted. And we had a wonderful conversation, and she became my agent, and she helped me a lot with the book over, probably about 5 years. She really helped me shape that book and figure out. And then, there were times where I was like, I don't think I have enough to say. And she's like, okay. And I, but wait a second, but maybe I do. But she was like a real reality check person. And there was a little bit of, I know I told you to do this, but not working for me. And so, finally after the umpteenth draft, I just said, all right, the next person who changes this book is going to be the editor who buys it. And it was acquired by Little A, and they were wonderful. They're the literary imprint of Amazon's publishing, not self-publishing, but publishing arm. And they were really like a wonderful, wonderful publisher, wonderful experience. I know people have thoughts about Amazon, but I think they do take care of their creators. It was very supportive and really wonderful.
Yeah. And you did the Audible as well, or the voice
I did,
version.
yeah. I had to audition to voice my own book, but I guess I passed the audition. And I went to Michigan. Beautiful, beautiful. I want to say it wasn't Grand Rapids, but it's where Audible headquarters are. And spend a few days recording the book. And yeah, it was a great experience. It was exhausting, but it was great.
That's wild. You had to audition to read your own book.
I can see why they would do that though, because what if you were an author who didn't didn't want to, or just didn't sound like wasn't comfortable reading. I know that I was listening to a Roxane Gay audiobook and I was really surprised. I was like, oh, Roxane, that's like she's got such a beautiful voice and speaking voice, but it wasn't her. It was somebody else, but I totally believed it was Roxane Gay because they got such a good match for her.
Yeah. Yeah. I love her books.
Yeah, she's very.
Yeah. She's great. Well, what happens next? And tell people where they can find the book, and tell people what you're working on, and how is Grace doing and all of that.
You can find the book at any bookseller if it's not on the shelf, because it's 5 years old at this point. So it's probably not, on all your indie bookstore shelves, but you can definitely find it online. Bookshop.org is a great one if you want to support independent booksellers. Also Amazon, of course. It's called Rock Needs River. And now I am working on a couple things. I'm working on a memoir that connects grief with things that are growing in my garden. So it's essays. It's highly personal. I'm not sure like anyone will ever want to read it, but I like working on it. And then something completely different, which is an adult graphic novel about a reluctant superhero called Laser Pussy.
Okay. Dig it. I dig that. So who's the rock and who's the river in your title?
The reason I chose that title was because I went to Texas. So Bridget and Bill had moved to Texas and they were staying in a family house. Weirdly, I think they didn't have running water either. So they would, have to go get their water from the store or something, the library or something. I was exhausted after interviewing them, talking to them for 3 days, because I really wanted to find out. I thought their story was so important, and they told me so many things that I didn't know about, like social workers try to talk them out of placing Grace for adoption, and it was a wild ride for them too. So I wanted to know more about that. So I flew to Texas, interviewed them, and then to kind of decompress after all that, I drove and I was in Kerrville, which is a beautiful little spot. I just drove and drove, and there was like a rainbow, and I sat on this rock near a riverbank, I guess, and I just noticed like, oh, they're symbiotic. So the river would not have its path or its form without the rocks, but the rocks kind of need the river to shape them and to move them. So it was very symbiotic. So I would say, sometimes you're the rock, sometimes you're the river. But in this case, I think because they were so moving and flowing, Bridget and Bill were the river, and I probably was the rock that could provide that stable home for Grace and the love of a, parent, like proper love for a parent.
Yeah, in a way, I suppose the fact that they haven't been in touch shows that they have faith in you as a mom. But I wonder for Grace, I've read about kids who grow up, who were adopted and grow up, have this, no matter how loving the family is, have a sense somewhere in them of abandonment or there's something missing feeling. And it's well documented with adopted kids. And I'm curious how she has found herself in all of that. I know she's young, so it's a little tricky to speak about her, but that idea that now they've gone away, how does that all figure in?
So yes, typically they say that people who are adopted do have some kind of original wound from the parents that they grew with versus the parents who, no matter, I mean, I was there the first day, so, I was always her mom. But also, I didn't want her to have any mystery or, wondering who they were. And so that's why I was so adamant about her knowing them, arranging the visits. She even went to, maybe this was a mistake, I don't know, but she even went to see, where they lived. And they explained it was like camping. And she was little. She was like 6 or 7. They explained, oh, yeah, this is like camping. And, this is what we cook our food on, etc. But I think she learned like, oh, I think she clocked very early on that like they were not well suited to parenthood. And that's what I wanted for her, was to have like I never lied. I always show, like when she turned 2, I gave her this picture book that showed her in the hospital with everybody, and her, the day legalization, when we're all in the courtroom together. And, so she has those tangible things that she can look at to, remember. I ask almost every single person who tells me they're adopted, because people always come up and tell, after, they know
Sure.
wrote about it, always tell me about it. And I just love our adoption community so much. And, whether they're birth moms or people who were adopted or adoptive parents. And I ask every adoptive person, about their experience. And some of them, do really have this like aching, yawning chasm of, some emptiness in them that really wishes they could know. I would say for the most part, though, some people, I've met people who just do not care. Like they couldn't care less. They've had a great life. They love their family. They, are grateful that their parent, their birth parent placed them for adoption. And then I know other people who say, I finally met my birth mom. It was amazing to see that, we had the same hair and we both like this thing, and, like all these genetic, wonderful surprises. But they're also like, I'm so glad that my parents raised me. So, I mean, it's really a huge, huge spectrum, and no one adoption story is the same as another.
That makes complete sense. Absolutely. Yeah. What is your other creative outlets? Let's talk about that for a moment.
Okay, so I've always considered myself a pretty creative person, but I really stuck to writing. My mom was a wonderful, wonderful artist. She was a painter. And then, my husband he's like constantly going to improv. So he goes to Impro, as you know, is a theater that does unscripted plays, and it's usually long form plays or genre plays. It's not, like joke after joke after joke. So I found myself getting like a little jealous that he was doing that and wishing that I could do it. And then I thought, wait a second, I can do that. Why don't I sign up? And so I started taking class at Impro. So that's one creative thing I'm doing. Another thing is I always wished that I could play guitar, and I picked it up a few times, but I never stuck with it, or the class was over, or the guy moved away, or whatever. And then I found a teacher, and I've been learning guitar for a year and a half now. And then the other thing is ceramics. Like I always wanted to do ceramics. So I just felt like I kept wondering why I'm not doing these things. Like everything doesn't exist in the future. You have to make it exist now. So I'm super happy with my prolific creative. I think I glazed like 24 pieces this week or something. So it's a lot of nature-based ceramics that I'm doing and super into now.
And you've got an Etsy store
called Art and Intrigue Studio.
Love it. That's wonderful. Congrats on that.
Thank you.
But what are your socials for people to find you?
Oh, I'm on Instagram at Vanessa McGrady.
And do you have a website?
I do. It's VanessaMcGrady.com.
Yeah, I thought you did, but always like to ask. And I put links on heyhumanpodcast.com for people to find all of the stuff we talk about easily and accessibly. Thank you so much. I find you delightful. Anytime you want to hang out, you let me know.
Oh my God. keep talking. I actually saw our mutual friend Charles the other day, and I'm like, she is so interesting. Like, what can't she do? But also, I mean, you're an artist, you're a musician, you're a podcaster, you're a writer. I mean, you have so many things you do, and you're a nice person. Like, you're like a truly, genuinely, like caring, loving, beautiful person. So I'm so happy I got a chance to know you.
Well, right back at you. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. You're a miracle. And so am I. Yay. Thank you for listening, everybody. Thank you, Vanessa. And I will be sending you a text so we can go get lunch.
Thanks for having me. Bye.
Bye. Rate, review, and subscribe to Hey Human Podcast on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks. Bye.